What's the good word, my nerds? Sarge here, back again, coming at you today to discuss a game that I think is going to be awesome in February of 2019, and that game is Anthem. I have really high hopes for this game. I'm hoping it's going to be the first game in that sort of MMO-light looter-shooter space to actually release in a complete and somewhat polished state. I mean, obviously, in that style of game, you're always going to be seeing updates and DLCs to keep the experience alive, but here's to hoping that it just doesn't come out in a similar state that we saw with Destiny and The Division, where there was almost nothing to do after the first few hours of gameplay. In addition to a solid release, there are several other things that Anthem is going to need to get right to be a successful game. In the next 7 to 10 minutes, I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions of what this game absolutely must do right upon release and what it must do right in the first few months after release to ensure long-term success. To have a successful release, the formula for Anthem should be quite simple, really. They just need to do the exact opposite of whatever Destiny and The Division had done. As I mentioned in my intro, those games both followed a terrible model of releasing incomplete games that did not nearly deliver on what was promised to their fan base until they had sold them an additional $50 or $100 in DLC. Learning from the mistakes of these other games, the first thing that Anthem must do right upon release, other of course than launching in a playable state, is that it must provide gameplay that is immersive and meaningful. In other words, the game world of Anthem has to at least be somewhat explained through its gameplay, and have a story that is at least somewhat cohesive. In recent looter shooters, the player base has often had no idea why our character in the game is at odds with their enemies, how they got there, or why any of what we're doing even matters. I'm not saying that overly complex lore is necessary, or that the game has to tell a story as good as Witcher or God of War, but there does need to be some context of the reason for our existence and why we have to kill thousands of enemies in the world to save our civilization. Also, if the game is going to be a grind fest, that's fine, but it would be nice if there were some context explaining why it is we're going to kill the same raid boss for the 87th time. The next 2 points are probably interchangeable depending on what kind of player you are. Based on the type of gameplay that I personally enjoy, at least some endgame content will need to be present at launch. This content should have variety not only in terms of the amount of activities available, but also in terms of difficulty to add replay value and fuel competition. The endgame should also tie in nicely with my next point, which is gearing, loot, and character customization. The endgame should serve as an interactive platform for acquiring worthwhile loot. This means the output of gear at endgame should be somewhat proportional to the input of effort and skill necessary to complete that content. I feel like games often miss the mark on this pretty badly. When you look at Year 1 Destiny, many players had run the raid dozens of times just to get one good item or weapon to drop. The Division, on the other hand, just recently went so RNG crazy with its loot system that you could earn the best gear in the game from just completing basic daily content without ever even playing a single incursion. For me, neither of those models is terribly satisfying. Taking 4 hours to pass a raid just to get jack shit is stupid. But earning gear that's competitive with the best in the game just for doing a daily mission feels like the ultimate participation trophy. Gear and looters and MMOs should always reflect the combination of time spent and difficulty of the content that was passed. Any other method completely disincentivizes the gearing process, as it essentially becomes meaningless when your character's look and power are up to RNG and loot boxes. For Anthem, it's imperative that they designate a few high-level items to remain truly rare. Not just that the game lists them as rare or epic, but that they are actually rare to come across in the game. Whether these items be a gun, a helmet, or even cosmetic upgrades to your javelin. Truly rare items and looters in MMOs are at the core of what drives exciting endgame content. Putting in the effort not only to down a difficult boss, but then to have a chance to earn exciting loot that not every other player in the game has is what makes the most difficult endgame content worth completing. Moving on from my gearing rant, let's spend the next couple of minutes talking about gameplay. Obviously, gameplay and mechanics can make or break the game. If the gameplay is just flat out boring, the game will suck. You could argue that gameplay is what saved both The Division and Destiny from being complete and absolute failures. Controlling my Guardian in Destiny was one of the cleanest feeling FPS experiences I had ever had. And the different gameplay options in The Division allowed you to replay content by using completely different mechanics based on your class setup. From what we've seen so far of Anthem's classes, it looks like we should see a pretty good variety of playstyles upon launch. Although I certainly hope that subclasses or talent trees will be used to add even more variety. I'd also love to see more classes introduced not too long after launch. With that being said, I do think what is being shown should offer at least satisfactory variety of gameplay mechanics and playstyles for the first few months. The combat system looks pretty fluid and cosmetically appealing, although I wouldn't say that I've been taken back by the graphics or anything of that nature. From what we've seen, it looks like each class has some sort of melee and a heavy attack that deals massive damage that's available only every so often. However, it looks like the majority of extended fights are using the primary weapon. I want to be clear that I think the combat system does look good, but I'm worried that if variety of player attacks is too limited, that we'll get that sponge bossy feel reminiscent of The Division. I'm all for taking 10 minutes to kill one enemy, as long as that doesn't mean simply getting to a safe place and unloading 100 rounds of the same gun. Again, I don't think this will be the case, but I haven't really seen enough to convince me 100% otherwise. I have to admit, I am really looking forward to the first time I get to use that missile barrage. Even if it means that I attract a bunch of enemies and get my squad killed, it'll totally be worth it. All in all, what we see on paper and in the gameplay trailers suggests that Anthem will be a solid game. But we can't possibly wrap this discussion up without at least mentioning loot boxes. After all, this is EA we're talking about. We know there will be loot boxes. We know there will be a lot of them. What we don't know is to what extent they will impact the game. As always, pay to win would just be outright terrible. But even pay for superior cosmetics is always a pretty big downside in my opinion. Even if the gear in the loot boxes is just vanity items, loot boxes saturate the game world with gear and seem to make everything in game feel less important, and drops from bosses seem less rewarding. Obviously, my opinion doesn't mean shit to EA, and loot boxes will be there. Here's to hoping they don't completely ruin what could otherwise be a great game. So to go ahead and wrap this thing up, I want to reiterate that I think Anthem looks great from what we've seen so far, and I'm really excited to get my hands on this game come February. If it can avoid following the questionable business practices of Destiny and The Division and release in a completed state, this game has the potential to steal good chunks of the player base from the aforementioned titles. But we won't know until February if this could be the first time in recent history that EA gets out of its own way and lets BioWare design and release a polished product without needing 2 years of DLC to deliver on pre-launch hype. As always guys, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you're expecting from Anthem in the comments below. Do you think it's going to be a flop or do you think it's going to be a great game? I'm interested on your thoughts and opinions. Mash the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. And as always, nerds, keep fighting the good fight. Until next time, Sarge out.